Hi, I'm Desiree Chichula, the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist. Join me for this 60-minute class on removing the power of your bias. Thank you all for prioritizing your morning with professional development. This is an elective course, so it just makes me so pleased when team members find time out of their day to come and engage in the process of self-improvement and professional development. So without further ado, we're going to start off this morning getting our bodies woken up. It's 9 a.m. You know how it is. I haven't had my coffee this morning, and research says there's a strong connection between your kinesthetic awakeness and your mental properties too. So this is going to be an exercise. Anybody a flag person in high school? No. Well, you will wish you were after you excel in this activity. So you're going to take the green flag, put it in your right hand, and you're going to take the orange flag and put it in your left hand. Now I'm going to ask you momentarily to raise your flags. And when I mean raise your flag, I don't mean go like this or like this. You need to commit. Remember, it's about getting your blood flowing. So the way this activity is going to work is in the center here, a word is going to appear. It's going to be a word that can quickly be categorized as either in the right category or in the left category. So as soon as you see the word, you're going to throw the appropriate arm up. In this case, the word is bark, so it will strongly categorize in the dog category. And then I'm going to go through them at a fast clip. I'm going to go like one every second. So your job is going to be immediately respond. Do not overthink this. You need to instinctively just throw your flags up and categorize. Some of these words, you might have a dog who meows. Don't overthink it. Just throw your flag up. Okay, so let's practice. Here we go. Very good. You have the idea. Now we're going to up the ante a little bit. It's going to be a name, either a traditionally female name or traditionally male name. It's going to be like John, so you would put it in the male category, or Nancy, you would put it in the female category. All right, same thing. We've got 10 of them, again at a fast clip, and you did great with the last one, throwing your hands up all the way. Do the same with this as well. Go. Okay, whose heart is beating faster? Right, so this does work for waking you up. Now, we did pets, we've done gendered names, and now we're going to do gendered concepts. Or excuse me, not gendered concepts. We're going to do concepts. So a word is going to appear in the center that is going to strongly convey alignment with career or strongly convey alignment with family. You're going to do the exact same thing. In doing the session a couple of months ago, I had a team member that said, well, I was a stay-at-home parent. This is impossible for me. Family and career was the same thing at that point in my life. For sure. These categories, we could make arguments for them all day long, but your job is for you to respond instinctively as quickly as possible. First one's a giveaway? Okay. Nicely done. We had 100% congruence on that one. You all had the same answers for all of the questions. Now a little bit more complex. We are collapsing two of the categories. So female names or family terms are going to go in the right column. Male names or career terms are going to go in the left column. So what is going to appear in the center is either a name or a family career concept. So you just have to remember that female or family is in the right column, and then male or career is in the left column. So a little bit more complicated, but I'm not going to slow down. Nicely done. And this is the last one for your full warm-up. We are collapsing female or career. So this before was female or family. Now it's female or career. So make a mental note of that. And in this category, we have male, same as before, but it's male and family, okay? So got them straight in your mind? Last one. That was fun to see you do. So of the 4 exercises, which was the most challenging? This one, absolutely. And why was this one? So in all of the other categories, we had confident arms up. For this category, I saw this. Oh, you look like air traffic controllers or speed car flag people. Why? What is it about this category where every single one of you second-guessed yourself on some of the responses?
It's not traditional.
Yeah, it's not traditional. Anybody want to add to that or expand on that concept? What about female and career is not traditional and male and family is not traditional? So let me break it down. This was not a warm-up exercise, right? You guys saw that. This was an exercise that uncovered your implicit bias. You can put the flags down. We're done for them for a little bit. So this uncovers your implicit bias. This exercise is from the Harvard Implicit Bias Project. And it's a computerized exercise that they have done in order to have people uncover their implicit biases. Implicit means you're not aware of it. So to do an exercise like this and make mistakes when associations are female and career or male and family, and you're making more mistakes than you did in the exercise before, well, that shows that you have an implicit bias against women and career and against men and family. If you made more errors on the last one, that is 100% true. Now, if you go to the Harvard Implicit Bias Project, and after today's class, I'm going to send you the link, they have scores of different ones you can take. There's implicit bias tests on color, there's some on gender, there's some on religion, there's some on political affiliation. It's really fascinating to go through and become aware of what's going on with you beneath the surface. But for us, this one's particularly surprising. So for the most part, with an exception, we in this room, 90% of us, because we're 10, are women, and we're women at work. But each and every woman here had a bias against women in careers. And I'm sure that our gentlemen here, you belong to a family, you have a family, and you had biases as well against men and family. So even though we consciously reject these ideas that men can't be family people and women can't be career leaders, implicitly, it's playing out in our subconscious. So we're going to cover today what is implicit bias, where does it come from, and how we can become rid of it in order to mitigate its effects. Because the fact that there are biases in the workforce against women in careers, that has implications, and I'll share that with you. The biases, the fact that there's biases against men being strong in the family, that has implications in the culture as well. So we're gonna do one more exercise to really drive this home. I'm gonna ask that you close your eyes, and I'm going to say a statement. And immediately as I say the statement, in your mind's eye is going to appear a picture. You're going to paint a mental picture instantly when I say this. I want you to remember the first picture that appears in your mind. And again, don't overthink it, just whatever pops up in your head. And I'm going to do this twice. So the first one is this. The executive was named to the board of directors. Who's the executive in your mind's eye? Take a snapshot. And the next one, the convenience store was robbed. Who robbed the convenience store? What do they look like? Open your eyes. Okay, so we have two pictures in our mind's eye. Social scientists say that not all Americans, 90% of Americans see nearly identical people for each scenario. Let's see how we did in this room. If for the executive being named to the board of directors, you saw a male, raise your hand. Okay. If you keep your hand up if you saw a white male wearing a suit, keep your hand up. A white male wearing a suit who was older, keep your hand up. Okay, we only had 30% in this room. So typically this is an activity that I do during new hire orientation, and we have full congruence to the 90%. I'm curious to know those that saw a woman. Would you like to share why?
Yeah, I immediately said I'm putting a woman. So I forcefully in my head said I'm going to put a woman here.
Okay, so you made the conscientious decision. Yeah, and I find when I ask individuals who don't see an older white male wearing a suit as the executive why, and they'll say, my immediate supervisor, or I just saw a movie where this person was represented. So it was something that connected to that person individually. So the convenience store being robbed, this is a little bit more sensitive because again, 90% of people see the same caricature of a person, but people aren't comfortable sharing in groups what they saw because it's troubling, right? So if you saw a male, we're gonna do it, we're gonna be honest, we're gonna be real. This class is about moving past this stuff. So in order to do that, we first have to be honest with ourselves. So if you saw a male, raise your hand. If you saw a minority male, so they were Black, Latino, Asian, keep your hand up. If they were a younger person, like a youth, keep your hand up. And if they were wearing kind of urban clothes, like jeans, a hoodie, maybe low-slung jeans, keep your hand up. Okay, I've got 50%. Normally that's 90%. So those of you that I lost, that dropped out, what did you see in your mind's eye? What was the different picture in your mental snapshot?
Well, I know that more whites commit crimes, so that was my logic part, but it was like a flash, like, which one's right? No, this one's right.
Oh, gotcha. So you saw both pictures, and you, again, metacognitively, you made the choice to choose the logical answer.
Yeah, because I know false media, so I was like, yeah, that's my idea, but I know that's not true.
Okay, good. So most Americans, when asked that question, 90% of them see as the executive an older white male wearing a suit, and they see as the criminal the minority youth. So these two things, they happen instantly. We paint these pictures automatically in a moment. But how does that happen? How do 90% of Americans, most people, develop these very complex images of what privilege is and what criminality is instantly? How in the world does that occur? Any thoughts about that? It's not a rhetorical question. I want to hear your ideas. How does that happen? Yeah, you see how it is. So say more about that. Where do you see how it is? News, media, social media, TV, movies.
What maybe you see in real life.
What you see in real life might support that. Personal experiences, your communities, where you were educated. So our dads, our parents, okay. Yeah, so personal experience. All of these things that have been mentioned can be grouped under one word, and that is culture. So it is culture that is sending us these signals about what a person in a position of privilege looks like and what a person who is not in a position of privilege looks like. Let's be more explicit. It is culture that is teaching us what is the caricature, the stereotype, the group of a criminal, and what is the caricature of an executive. I don't know about you guys, but that's so troubling to me. That culture through media, through TV, through internet, you cannot escape culture, right? Every single interaction you have in the outside world is feeding you, is coaching you, is programming you for what is a good person and what is a bad person. And it's programming you on these very explicit lines of color, race, gender, and age. All of these things are not neutral. Culture's programming us with these things that we are unaware of them, but we act in ways that conform to how culture is programming us, contrary for certain groups of people and beneficial to certain groups of people. So removing the power of our bias is necessary so we can become conscientious enactors in our daily life. So we are not reproducing these messages the culture is giving us about how to respond to people that we don't even know based on their visible dimensions of diversity. So today we're going to understand what implicit bias is and the science behind it, understand how it can negatively influence workplace decisions, and we're going to commit to taking one action to stop implicit bias from continuing its effects in our own lives. Okay, so at this juncture, I hope then that you have recognized, and you're with me, that you're biased. I'm biased. We all are biased. And biased is not a bad thing. Bias is not, oh, I went to that class with Desiree and she told us we all were biased, she bias shamed us. No, there's no such thing as bias shaming. Bias isn't a bad word. It's not that terrible B thing, because every single human being has bias. We cannot escape bias, and bias is completely functional for our ability to go on in our daily lives. Bias is normal and bias is necessary for us to go about our day. It would be like this. So let's pretend bias didn't exist and you decided, I'm gonna be a person who rises above caricature. I'm gonna rise above stereotype, and I'm going to, every time I encounter a new scenario, deal with that scenario individually. Well, I see a pet in the distance. I don't want to bias this pet as being ferocious. No. I'm going to consider this pet for how it treats me and its individual attributes in our encounter together. As I get closer to the pet, wow, I see that the pet is actually a lion and it is ferocious and it has claws and fangs, and all of a sudden, my lack of biasing, stereotyping, if you will, has put my life in jeopardy. Bias is necessary because that instant response, it's the fight, flight, or freeze response that is necessary for survival. So bias has developed within us deep inside of our amygdala as a primary, as a primal response to know in a moment whether we are okay. For our ancestors, it served that very useful function. And even today, it serves that function for us to be able to decide, as somebody steps in the elevator with us, fight, flight, or freeze, am I okay? And unfortunately, we do that in ways that categorize the most visible dimensions of diversity of an individual. What's the first thing you notice when you see somebody? Their gender, whether they're a boy or whether they're a girl. And that has to do, again, our survival instinct. Is this a person I'm going to mate with, or is this a person I'm not going to mate with? So you notice their gender immediately. And then what's the next thing you notice about a person when you see them? Their skin color, because it's the most obvious thing. So gender, skin, ethnicity, and then the next thing, anybody want to take a guess what social scientists say is the fourth thing we stratify people from? Well, fourth thing, is ageism, so like where they fall generationally. And then the fifth thing, how else do we sort people automatically? Class. Yeah, class. So socioeconomic status. So usually by cues such as dress, hair, shoes, status symbols. That's why those things exist, because it's how we order people instinctually as to whether they're good, they're bad, we're safe, not safe. So bias is completely normal, completely natural. We need it in order to survive. It's our fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, here's the rub. And every moment, there are 11 million pieces of competing information that we are contending with. By what I mean by we are contending with, think of your brain as a computer processor. There are 11 million bits of information that you are processing right now. I can't even comprehend what all of those things would be, right? But that's what the scientists tell us. They also tell us that only 40 of those things that we're processing, we can be conscious of them while we're processing them. So those are the things that you're thinking of right now, like what is Desiree saying? How's it fitting into my schema of life? Her social cues, maybe you're hungry. You're being able to multitask 40 things consciously at one time. But that results in 99.999999% of what is happening every moment being processed unconsciously. And that, my friends, is where implicit bias lives, hides, and breathes, in what we are not aware that we're doing. So most of our daily functions happen automatically. They happen implicitly because we truly can't be bogged down with deciding consciously all of the disparate factors of information that we face in a moment. Think about a computer. If you give it too many commands at once, what happens to the computer? It freezes. Yeah, we would completely you can't control alt delete your way out of that. So the Nobel-winning psychologist, David Kahneman, came up with this theory on implicit bias. And he uses the metaphor of the human brain kind of as a computer as well. And he says, human beings have two processors. They have a slow processor. This does the 99.99996% of information. And they have a fast processor. It does the 40 discrete pieces of information. And the interaction between these two processors is so that the slow processor gets tired easily. It makes the body wear out. Those of you that have had a hard day at work, you've been thinking through a problem a lot, you've been using a lot of your cognitive processes, you get home and you are physically exhausted. The slow processor, it works hard, it tires the entire machine very easily. So as soon as the slow processor gets enough information to not think anymore, it tags out to the fast processor who does it automatically. Now, you might wonder, how did a psychologist win a Nobel Prize in economics? And this is how. So David Kahneman has this famous experiment that we're going to do together right now. And the experiment goes like this. He asked thousands of undergraduate students over his career this exact question. And it goes like this. Veronica, as an undergraduate student, was committed to civil rights and getting out women's right to vote. That is the background of Veronica when she was an undergraduate student. Veronica's now an adult, and she's an adult who is a bank teller. I'm going to ask you, what is more probable with Veronica? Is it more probable that A, she is simply a bank teller, or B, that she is a bank teller who is involved in the feminist movement? So what is more probable about Veronica? That she's A, raise your orange flag if you think it's more probable that she's A, that she's simply a bank teller, or is it more probable that B, green flag, she's a bank teller who's involved in the feminist movement? Go ahead and commit to A or B. Okay, so the reason this experiment is so famous is because everybody, with one exception, got it wrong. It is more probable that Veronica is a bank teller. Here's the reason why. The question is a probability question. It's a mathematical question. So in both scenarios, it's 100% probable that she's a bank teller, right? In B, you automatically, or not automatically, but you're placing conditions to why she's a bank teller. She's a bank teller with a condition. So it's less probable that she is B. So the correct answer is it's more probable that she's a bank teller. Now, David Kahneman in his research goes on for many years. He writes that experiments like Veronica's experiment show that as soon as people get enough information, they stop thinking. So I front-loaded you with who I told you Veronica was in the past. So you developed a schema for Veronica. You put Veronica in a box, you put Veronica in a stereotype. When I gave you a situation that exploited that stereotype, that she was a bank teller who's also involved in civil rights, We did not think logically about it. Our slow processor said, oh, I got this one. Immediately, it went to the fast processor, even though that logic, and some would say common sense, would say, no, of course it's more probable that she's in scenario A. Now, the reason David Kahneman's work gets a Nobel Prize for economics is that he was able to use the psychological theory of implicit bias and develop a formula that has been used in like actuarial science and even in things like, you know, when you go to the grocery store and there's candy bars at the checkout line for implicit buying. That's David Kahneman's work to show that even though people have a cart full of groceries and they're going to get food, it's that food that they can buy on impulse and eat quickly on their way to the car that they're going to grab for. So it takes logic out of the equation, and his research has been exploited to basically see how your money can be got easier. So moving past your slow processor to your quick processor. His research exploits our common sense and gets to our biases in order to take our money. So the science of implicit bias says that as soon as you have enough information, or so you think, about a person or a scenario, you choose never to think about those things again and make all your decisions based on those biases that you came to originally. It's very difficult for something to go back from the fast processor to the slow processor. This process from bringing things out of automatic thinking back to deliberate thinking is hard work. You know the expression that first impressions last the longest, or first impressions count more, or first impressions are hard to overrun? Yeah, they are. Research supports that. Research supports that as soon as you meet somebody, you put them in their typology, you put them in the box, and even though you'll have many more experiences with that person, you've already decided who they are, so all of their actions are just confirming that you've categorized them correctly on your initial first contact. So this has major implications for every single time that two people get together. And I'm going to ask you to read silently these 6 slides. It's important that you get the full gamut of how implicit bias touches our lives in a variety of ways. So if you would please read each slide silently to yourself, then look me in the eyes so I get confirmation that you finished, and I'll advance. Last one. So here we have 6 vignettes from research on implicit bias that run the gamut of everyday life. And I pulled pieces that had in common 2 things. Did anybody note what each of these 6 vignettes had in common? Any guesses? Race. Certainly. Race is featured as the most prominent characteristic in implicit bias research. And that ties back to implicit bias plays strongly on the strongest visible dimensions of diversity that you see first. So we sort people by gender, then by color. So most of the research is done in skin color and implicit bias. And then there's one other thing in common with all of these pieces of research. Name, yep, that's in a couple of them. But who's the person doing the biasing in all of these pieces of research? We have a doctor, a surgeon, we have a legislator, we have a real estate agent, we have a teacher. All of the pieces of research, I think a car salesman. The people doing the biases are people in the helping industry. These are people who have decided on careers to serve others, whether it's through saving lives like the surgeon or through changing laws to make society more equitable like the legislator. Each of the people committing the biased activity are people who are well-intended, who engage in careers to help others. Kind of like us here, where our mission is to cure and prevent cancer. So I share all this research with you to show a couple of things. There's nobody who's too good to be above implicit bias. Each and every one of us, despite our overt goals, our overt motivations, we are still subject to implicit bias because most of our thought processes happen unconsciously. So despite the fact that we're healers, helpers, and innovators here, we still have to monitor this phenomenon in our life. And the second thing is that implicit bias is hitting most those from domains of people of color. And I'll hold on to that and we'll get to that in a moment. So if everybody in the culture holds implicit biases, then even a little bit of bias can amount to a lot. So despite our race, our ethnicity, our gender, our skin color, our socioeconomic cues, if we all are practicing the same implicit biases that the culture is giving us, then that same person who's on the receiving end, who might be stratified lower on the totem pole, they're getting it from everybody too. What this amounts to is the phenomenon that you probably are familiar of cancer health disparities. Cancer health disparities is an unequitable, an unequal outcome of cancer incidence of cancer outcomes and cancer morbidity due simply to a visible dimension of diversity. So this is the highest look we can get on cancer health disparities, the most aggregate look. And what it shows here in the blue for incidence, if you want to compare, let's take Black African Americans with white Americans in the first column, nearly identical incidence of cancer. So Black Americans and white Americans get cancer at almost identical rates. The differences are statistically insignificant. However, if you look, Black Americans' bar is much farther than white Americans' bar. Black Americans are dying of cancer at 25% higher rates than white Americans. Let me say that again. I want the gravity of this statement really to anchor us to why you're here today. Black Americans are dying of cancer at 25% higher rates than white Americans. This data has been controlled for socioeconomic status. This data has been controlled for education. This data has been controlled for just about every identifier we can control for, but race. So why are Black Americans dying of cancer at higher rates than white Americans? Now, of course, there are so many other factors like access to care, insurance, preventative screenings, healthy education, lifestyles, food and behaviors, family practices, cultural ideas about disease. There's a lot of other things that we can't touch. And I'm not in any way trying to suggest that implicit bias is why Black Americans are dying of cancer at higher rates. I will suggest that implicit bias is a factor. It is not the only factor. But of all of the factors, implicit bias as healers, helpers, and innovators is the one factor we can do something about. We can't do anything about whether with socioeconomic status, right? Here at the Cancer Center, we don't have the capacity to pull people out of poverty. My department in diversity, we do a lot of work in providing screenings and access and educating on healthy lifestyles, but all we can provide is education. All we can provide is the tools. Whether the community member decides to or not, we don't know. Of all of the factors that feed into cancer health disparities, implicit bias is something that we can leave this room and we can have control and agency about, and we can help change. We all, I know, agree that this should not be, right? This is, bless you, this is an anathema to the work that we do, that populations are having disparate rates of survivorship simply because of the color of their skin. And in our work in diversity, we can stratify this by just about every other indicator of diversity. We can stratify this by gender, we can stratify this also by socioeconomic status, we can stratify this by native language, we can stratify this by country of origin, and also by every single disease area. So we can stratify it as well by colorectal, we can stratify it by thoracic, we can stratify it by sarcoma. In every single one of those slice and dice scenarios, cancer health disparities still exist. Sometimes it's a little bit differently, like for example, in breast care, Indian women are more likely to undergo radical mastectomies than all other women. So they get the least conserving breast-saving procedure simply because of their race and ethnicity, because all of the other things have been controlled for. So the importance of implicit bias, I don't think, it might be overstating to say it's a life or death thing, but in the work that we do in providing access and care, since a little bit of bias has a big consequence, we can definitely make a difference for patients and begin to address cancer health disparities here within the center. So that's in our work as healers and innovators. So far as workforce goes, so implicit bias as well has to do not only with our work in cancer care as cancer health disparity shows, but also like our own careers in the corporate ladder. Remember we started the exercise with the bias of family and career for each gender? Well, remember, all of society holds these same biases. Women align more for individuals with family, men align more for career. The implications of that are this. So Google did a simulation where they put into a computer this scenario. Okay, let's have an organization, Google says, that is 7 or 8 tiers. And by 8 tiers, that means like this is entry level. Then we have supervisor going all up the rung. So entry, supervisor, manager, director, senior director, VP, EVP, and then we have Dr. List. So that's an 8-level organization. And Google says, okay, so in this 8-level organization, we're gonna start off as 50-50, complete gender equity. Now let's put in the simulation 1% bias in favor of men, because we know that when it comes to career, the culture is biased in favor of men. So let's put in the simulation just 1% bias in favor of men in their annual performance review. That would be like for us a 3.6 versus a 3.7 in our annual review, just a little bit of bias. And let's put in the simulation that there's 15% attrition. So every year there's 15% turnover with team members. Here at Moffitt it's a little bit higher, but for the simulation they did 15%. So every year 15% of the workforce leaves, and we fill that emptied role with the rung below it. So let's say a supervisor leaves. Well, a new team member who wants to go into leadership fills that role. So it's filled from the rank below it. So we have 1% bias in favor of men in 8-tier organization. Now they run the simulation 8 times. So over 8 cycles for us, it would be, 8 years. So this is what happens with 1% bias over 8 years when you fill the category with the category below it. In the eighth run, it stays, pretty equitable here at the lower levels, but take a look at the highest levels, the executive. We have 35% women and 65% would be men at the leadership level. And that's just 1% bias in a performance evaluation in favor of men. And here at the center, our level 7 is 26% women, 74% men. So let me ask you then this question. Are older white males being promoted to leadership simply because it's who we see in our mind as a leader? Then it becomes social cultural reproduction. An older white male might see themselves as being more fit because they fit the profile that society's seeing. And just the opposite. Think about a minority youth coming up in America today who sees so many representations of themselves as criminals or bad. Does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy on both ends of the spectrum? I don't have that answer, and social scientists don't have that answer either. But I will say, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just popped in. I don't.
Sure.
You don't mind. So most of our NBA basketball stars are black. Do we have more black youth wanting to be basketball stars, or more white youth wanting to be basketball stars?
I have no idea. But that's along the same line. Yeah. So does a black youth say, oh, okay, I see my role models in these categories, that's where I'm going to go to? I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
My 13-year-old wants to be a basketball star.
Right, so in diversity, one of the reasons diversity is so important is because we all need models of what we can be and what we can attain to. And what makes this statistic even more troubling is that at Moffitt, our workforce demographics are 75% female. Our population is skewed female because of we have 1,000 or 750 nurses, and that pool is predominantly female. So even though most of our workforce is women, still at the executive level, our leaders tend not to be women. Is this all due to implicit bias? Of course not, because we know there's a lot of other factors that play into that. Pipeline programs, for example, MBAs, where a lot of executive leaders come out of, they tend to be male. So there's a lot of precursors in that. But what I am suggesting is that all of us hold an implicit bias against women in careers and for men in careers. So that definitely has something to do with these troubling statistics. So, Desiree, this is heavy stuff, right? This stuff has life and death consequences. I am biasing against myself as a career woman. Like, this stuff goes deep, and everybody who I see is doing the same thing. It's overwhelming. It's disconcerting. I've got happy news for you. Implicit bias can be reversed by one powerful thing. And actually, it was one of the first things that you said, becoming aware of implicit bias. As soon as you recognize that you're having a thought that is not grounded in facts, data, actual decision, then you can make that choice about not choosing to do what the culture has programmed you to do. It's like this. So culture is programming you to reproduce all of these ideas about people based on their visible dimensions of diversities. You then become a cultural zombie. Oh, you're a black person, you fall in this category. You're a white person, you fall in this category. No. As soon as you recognize that you are having a judgment, a thought, an indictment, an appraisal of somebody instantly, that's where it happens. As soon as you get that recognition, then you can get a hold of that thought. It seeks being implicit. It stops being implicit. It stops being hidden as soon as you become aware of it. So all of the research in the field of implicit bias says that the most powerful thing, it sounds so overly simplistic, but it's true, is becoming aware of an implicit biases is what can lead to a reversal in these outcomes. And it's going to happen to you. Now that you've been in this class and you're aware of what implicit biases are, you're going to meet somebody for the first time and instantly make a judgment of them. Remember, that's normal. That's what bias does, fight, flight, or freeze. Now, whether you seek to continue to hold that judgment that you made instantly without facts or data, that's the choice that you make. If you choose not to question where you decided that this person was not nice from, well, you're going to continue to reproduce and replicate what the culture's telling you about that person based on the categories of visible dimensions of diversity they fall on. But if you stop and say, no, I'm going to reject that, I'm going to give this person an opportunity to share with me who they are based on their thoughts, based on the way that they treat me, based on their conversation, based on their actions, based on their intrinsic dimensions of self, then you have overcome the power of your bias. Here's how it works. All day, you're going to meet new people, new patients, see people for the first time. As soon as you meet them, automatically you're going to get an idea of who they are. That is not based on the person. That is culture giving you that idea. You need to override that thought. Get a hold of that thought, set it to the side, and let that person educate you on who you are. So the first thing you have to do is be aware and catch those thoughts. I call those thoughts bias flares. And in my journey as being conscientious in my own life, I have started to record what my bias flares are. So whenever I make a judgment on somebody that's particularly negative or that troubles me, I don't know this person, but all of a sudden I meet you and I notice that in my journey removing the power of my biases, I've been recording my bias flares to see what it is that I have an automatic negative association to. And I saw it written in my bias flare journal a couple of times that I tend to have them with people who have tattoos that are visible on the face or neck. So immediately I meet somebody with a face or neck tattoo, I don't want anything to do with them. That's an implicit bias on my part. I don't know anything about that person, and what they choose to do or not do with their face has nothing to do with me. And now I know that because I saw in my bias journal that I have this strong response against people with these exterior dimensions of diversity, when I meet somebody with a neck tattoo or a face tattoo, I know, okay, Desiree, you need to go in this conscientiously. It's not about what you've been loaded about people with this particular, characteristic. So I have to go out of my way to mitigate what those preconceived notions are. So first step in the journey of removing the power of your biases is being aware that you have implicit biases. So part of being aware is ownership. Hi, my name is Desiree Chichula. I have biases and you do too. And what I would like you to do is actually say this out loud with me. Insert your name, hear yourself say it, own that you have biases. Biases are not a bad thing. And we're going to do this all together, and I really do want you to do this out loud. Okay. Hello, my name is? No. Let's do this again. We'll all say hello, my name is, and say your name loud. Nobody's going to hear your name on the video. We're all, it's all going to be muffled, so don't worry about it. Okay, together. Hello, my name is. I am biased. You are too. Thank you. So here's why this is all important. I want to continue to give you, as if cancer health disparities and inequitable career trajectories is not enough reason, I'm going to give you even more motivation to engage in the process of capturing these thoughts that lead to exclusionary behaviors. So unconscious bias, it happens. We all have it. We can't escape it. We're programmed for it, right? But when we don't capture those thoughts, when we don't override those thoughts, what happens is that normal bias, that's still inclusionary for some populations, it devolves into stereotypes. Stereotypes are beliefs not about individuals, it's about groups of people in certain denonyms or demographics. That devolves into prejudice. This is not liking entire groups of people based on some dimension of diversity. And that devolves into all those terrible isms: sexism, classism, racism, all of those terrible things. So we have a spectrum from unconscious exclusion, which happens that we're not aware of but can still be harmful, all the way to deliberate exclusion, all of those terrible prejudices. And this is what happens when those biases become entrenched. When we think that those biases are actually rooted in facts or in data. Oh, people feel enabled or emboldened to have a prejudice because they think that whatever judgment or indictment they made on that population is actually based in some sort of truth, right? So monitoring our biases when they're at the unconscious level, as soon as we become conscious of them, we have to get a hold of them, override them to mitigate them. And then the other thing, after we get a bias flare, we must question our first impression or instinct. So whenever you have an immediate impression, an immediate instinct about an individual, it's always rooted in implicit bias. You have no other data to draw from. What information do you have about this person to judge who they are other than what you see? None whatsoever. So question your first impression or instinct. That will always lead you to a place that you have now captured that thought and you can override it, so should you choose to. The next important thing in the journey of removing your power of biases is to justify your decisions. So if you justify your decisions, all of a sudden, you're not just basing judgments on visible dimensions of diversity. You are seeking for facts, data, information, and who's going to be providing you information? That individual, right? This is especially useful for patients. Oftentimes we feel like we might know the patient history, they fall into this category, I get it. However, the patient should be our direct source of cultural information. Our patient should be the direct source of them telling us how they want to be treated. It's no longer the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want to be treated. The platinum rule, treat others how they want you to treat them. How do you know that? By asking them. So it's taking that extra step and engaging in conversations with our patients and with other team members. And then asking for feedback. So another theme in the research on biases and how to stomp them out shows that when we put people together, when we collect people to make decisions, we sidestep bias. And think about it, like let's say we get a job candidate in this room. And as soon as we see them, yep, our implicit bias is going to start making assumptions, but we're going to capture those thoughts, set them aside. The same thing is going to happen for everybody. However, in groups, we're really good about not saying those things that we know that, not saying those things overtly, that we don't, how should I say this differently? In groups, we don't say those things that are embarrassing out loud, right? So let's say we have a job candidate who comes in and he or she is dressed in a way that might not conform to the job. Everybody's immediately got that impression. However, as a group, we're not going to say, oh, she came in with flip-flops, because that's not professional talk. we would probably say she may need some coaching in our standards of dress. Okay, well then all of a sudden, that's not a reason not to hire her because she wore flip-flops to the job interview. We've already found a solution. And that's why working in groups is so useful, because we justify our decisions with facts, data, solutions, rather than just saying, I don't think she looks the part. No, in every single way, not looking the part is based on an implicit bias of a judgment of whatever the looks like for whatever field it is. And this isn't just, I see we have a couple of nurses and specialists in here. This is for the nursing team hiring a male. Even though a male might not look the part of a nurse, if they have the skills, if they're able to articulate their capacity to do the work, gender should have nothing to do with it. So implicit biases happen in every single domain and sector of our work here at the center. So asking for feedback, thinking collectively. And I have got you guys at 10 o'clock, so we are on perfect timing. So bottom line, removing the power of your biases, the first thing you do is you catch a hold of that thought. You become metacognitive of it, you become aware of it in order to override it with justification of data, information, and getting to know the person as an individual, and them being the source of information of the judgments you made about them, and then, if necessary, thinking collectively as a group. So removing the power of your bias can be done, but it will take effort for you all to monitor your interactions with the new people you meet, because as soon as you get an immediate judgment, you're going to have to go through the work of stopping that thought. Remember, the slow processor doesn't want you to do this. The slow processor wants to say, oh, I have a category for this person, and put them in that stereotype. But you need to hold on to that thought, because all of this stuff adds up, and it matters, and it can matter of ways of exclusion and worse consequences and outcomes for patients and other team members along their career journeys. Any questions for me? Thank you guys so much for coming out. I'll send you an email later today with the Harvard Implicit Bias activities. Spend a little bit of time doing that. I think you would surprise yourself with the outcomes of it. And I appreciate you all prioritizing professional development this morning. Consider me a resource with all things cultural competence and diversity and inclusion. I'm your person for that.